Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Psyched webinar. My name is Daniel Flynn. I'm a clinical psychologist working in the HSE. I'm the originator of Psyched, and I currently chair the Psyched steering group. So in a few moments, I'm going to hand you over to Jonathan Healy, who is going to be our MC for this morning's session. But I just want to take this opportunity to tell you first a little bit about Psyched. So Psyched is an interagency partnership approach with a key agenda of promoting mental health and well-being in workplaces and communities across Cork City and County. So the funding for this comes from Healthy Ireland. So just thinking a little bit about Psyched and what we mean by the name Psyched. So taking a dictionary definition, Psyched means to be mentally prepared, to be excited, or to be emotional. So this is an invitation to you all to participate in Psyched and to get excited about the prospect of advocating and championing mental health promotion individually and in your workplace. Psyched is also an acronym, and this is for positive support that you can have every day. So what you can do to improve your own mental health and well-being, and what you can do to support others in your workplace and your community to also have more positive mental health. The reality is that 1 in 4 people in Ireland will experience mental health issues that require treatment each year. And despite this, there's still a considerable amount of stigma about mental health and mental illness in Ireland. So the reality is that mental health exists on a continuum. On the right-hand side, you'll see that for the vast majority of us, hopefully that we have good mental health, that we have good work-life balance, and that we're mentally available to others. But then at different points in our life, we may move up or down that continuum. And there may be points in our life where we're at the left end of this spectrum, where we require professional support in addressing some of our mental health concerns. The recent COVID-19 situation has certainly stretched all of our mental health and well-being. And I think all of us can see that we're moving up and down that continuum more and more all of the time. So how we feel and think is central to the way we live our lives. And just like our physical health, our mental health will understandably have its ups and downs over time. So in Psyched, and as part of this initiative, we want you and your workplace to do a number of things. So we aim to stimulate conversations leading to a better understanding of mental health. We want to promote mental health and well-being and set goals for positive improvement in the places where we work and live. And then finally, we want to celebrate commitment and good practice and innovation in mental health promotion in workplaces through participation in Psyched recognition celebrations. So each year, over the past 3 years of Psychd's existence, we've had those celebrations here in Cork in either City Hall or County Hall to recognise the good work that workplaces have been doing in relation to the mental health promotion agenda. And this year, unfortunately, because of COVID, we have replaced our celebration event with this webinar. So I'm delighted to have you all join us this morning. There are over 500 people with us this morning on this webinar, and it's also streaming live on YouTube currently. So I hope you enjoy the talks this morning from our invited guests and also our panel discussion. So I'm now going to hand you over to Jonathan.
Daniel, thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. You are in your workplaces. Most likely you're in your home. I put on a suit today. It's one of the first times I've actually done this in quite some time, to the point at which I actually found a train ticket from February. So it's a little weird. But the good news is we are all here and we're going to have a great 90 minutes or so. And it's my distinct pleasure to be your host over the next little while. You are welcome, as Daniel has said, to this Psyched webinar. We're going to be looking at some of the latest insights on ways to grow a happy workplace culture. Plus, considering now more than ever we need to mind our mental health and well-being, we're going to focus on ways of building resilience, managing change, and challenging stigma related to mental health. This is really an interactive session. We welcome your questions and your opinions as we go along. We're going to run a few polls and we'll address some of the questions you sent in for our speakers today. So all that action, if you're watching on a laptop or a desktop, it's all happening down below on the Zoom. You can see there's a Q&A there. The polls are going to pop up there as well. So you can really get involved, and we want you to get involved because this is your event. You can follow us on social media as well. So if you're tweeting about this, or if you're putting pictures up on LinkedIn or Insta or whatever is your poison, please use the hashtag PsychedCork. So hashtag PsychedCork. We really look forward to hearing from you. Let's talk about our first speaker now. Nic Marks is an independent policy advisor. He's a speaker, he's a statistician, he's a psychotherapist, and he's an author. As a fellow of the New Economics Foundation, Nic Marks created the Happy Planet Index, the 5 ways to well-being and the 5 ways to happiness at work. In 2019, he set up FridayPulse, a company specializing in applying the 5 ways to happiness at work, offering a happiness KPI and a 15-question 5 ways to happiness at work culture profile. He's delivered 2 TED Talks to date. He has a unique insight and he has ideas that are worth sharing when we're talking about looking after our mental health in work. We're delighted he has given so generously of his time to speak with us. Nic, it's over to you.
So thank you. Thank you for asking me today. And I'm going to talk about the 5 ways to well-being and particularly about how we promote positive mental health
at work. Probably most of you know that the 5 ways to wellbeing were part of a UK government project, part of the Foresight project, 2008. And it was a large project, 106 different elements of it, and 5 ways was one of them. And I was at the New Economics Foundation then, which is a think tank in London. I founded the Centre for Wellbeing there. And we basically pitched this project. The idea was very much to take the idea of 5 fruit and vegetables a day and translate them into how we could do 5 positive actions for ourselves a day for our mental health. The brief was that they had to be evidence-based, had to have a universal appeal, they had to target the individual. We couldn't be saying government policy, we had to be saying what people could do in their own power. And there needed to be a need for variety, that there was different ways that people could do it. And we were very keen to use social marketing ideas, that you start from where people are, where their energy is, and you focus on building a relationship with them, between them. Intervention in it. You're positive, upbeat, aspirational. Government likes to tell us what not to do, not necessarily what to do. And there needs to be a sort of clear exchange for people that they can, they're going to get benefit from it easily, which is actually very easy for your positive mental health. We created a long list. We actually got Post-it notes and stuck about, hundreds of bits of evidence all over the place, and we started clustering them together. It wasn't a formal statistical cluster analysis, but it was a way of doing that. And we created a long list. So, yes, the 5 ways that made it are there, but also we identified that work was really good for people's positive mental health, just being in work and the type of work they did. That being out in nature was, the way we dealt with that was that we didn't have room for it, but we put it under be active, like go outside. We put it on take notice the changing seasons. And then also nutrition was important, particularly as a protection against mental ill health, but the evidence base has got even stronger in the last 10 years. So, but we felt the government already strongly messaged on that. In fact, 5 fruit and vegetables a day is so prevalent as a message that we didn't really feel we needed to do that in here. So they became, connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire. And we sought to make them very inviting and open to people. That's why we put 3 dots afterwards. So instead of saying connect, it's saying connect, try this. And they became very popular, very well used. Not only in the UK, in fact, New Zealand used them very widely and still do use them very widely in their public mental health campaigns, but also in terms of government policy. And they've also commissioned research on it. So the graph on the right is showing that the more of the 5 ways you do, the higher you're likely to be, your mental health is likely to be. They also tended to prioritize the social ones, connect and give. We deliberately frame those at the beginning and the end of ours so that people were reminded that well-being is very social. It's very much between us. they've actually put them at the front. They did that particularly out of the Christchurch earthquake emergency, where they basically focused on connecting, seeing that people had enough connections and whether they could give things back to the community if they were in a strong position. So they very much focused on those too. But in the UK, very widely used in lots and lots of different projects. And in fact, even though the brief was to individuals, people tended to use it in their community projects, checking that they were sort of doing all of them. And in a way, I think it just unpacked wellbeing at sort of the right level, that it gave people a lot of creativity in how they could do it. But they saw the holistic nature of it, that it was these 5 things interacting between them. And they've been immensely popular. I mean, there's been so many projects on them. We totally lost count of how many there are. But we did do a second report, which you may or may not have seen, where we brought it together and we tried to systemize how different policy areas are doing. And that's still available. It's obviously was in 2012, so it's not necessarily as up to date as it would be, but it gives you an idea about what was going on. Now, as I worked at NEF for about 10, 15 years, I started to think about what I wanted to do next. And I was acutely aware that work was an opportunity. So it was there in the 5 ways. And we didn't do it because it was focused at the working population, organizational. But I sort of noticed that it's quite hard to reach adults through public policy. And so I thought, well, one way to reach adults is through work. And so I decided I wanted to work on the idea of work and how we could promote positive work, which includes positive mental health and goes right up to, productive work in lots of ways. And so as I've done that, I am, as said, I'm a statistician. And I wanted to think about I'd already thought about it, but how to operationalize the idea that feelings are data. And at the heart of it really goes that in some ways, the way our sensation, our perception, our feelings are saying whether the environment that we're in is good or bad for us. We feel happy when things are good. We feel unhappy when things are bad. We use emojis all the time to rate experiences. So it's very easy to then go to putting numbers on those. And I particularly work with this question. How have you felt at work this week? So it's got that feeling element. It's at work. It's this week. So it gives a time frame to it. And that's very helpful because, one, we can start drawing graphs with timelines, but also it's acknowledging that we're not happy all the time. Even, none of us are. In fact, there are different sort of wavelengths of people's experience. You can think about, the morning you've had, and there's going to be ups and downs of the morning. You can think about the week you've had. You can think about the year you've had. And I'm going to show you a graph of the year we've all had just in a minute. And you can think about a lifetime of ups and downs. So there's different wavelengths. But this is capturing that short wavelength of a week. It's about the right length of episode. We typically work in a sprint of a working week. But if you put all of that data together for all of our clients in this crazy year, you get a graph that looks like this. And it's actually going back into last year, but basically it's showing that before COVID struck, we were in a normal pattern. We do have a peak at Christmas. People are happier in the run up to Christmas. But generally speaking, people are around about 70 on our scale. And then COVID hits and there's this huge drop across all of our clients. And, March was scary. It was an anxious making time. We all had to adjust. Most of us suddenly had to change our place of work. HR departments, people departments had to scramble, helping people get home as they themselves were getting home. Huge pressure on HR and people departments this year. People being made redundant. It was a very, very difficult time. But then what you see is this sort of what I call the curve of resilience, where teams are rebuilding. And our clients are seeing this data every week. So this is data just from our clients. And actually, of course, we lost some clients that made people redundant. We had people furloughed. So there's some people outside in our data set anymore, but these are the people still working. And you can see them building back over time. And then, maybe some fatigue and the second wave hitting and winter coming. And, the vaccine hasn't got factored into this, but, that's still a light at the end of the tunnel. There's still quite a way to go with that even. So, it shows that how difficult a year it's been. And it's only by collecting that data every week that you see that. Now, that's a global impact. I mean, that's across all of our clients, and our clients are in North America. They're in UK, predominantly North America and Europe, not many Southern Hemisphere ones. But so we're seeing that pattern across the whole globe. Now, organizations typically have these patterns internally. They have an organizational setback or a team setback, or an individual has a setback. And the way the data works is it helps identify what the hot and cold spots are in your organization. Are people bouncing back? it is inevitable there'll be setups, but it's how we bounce back and do that. And we create a platform that does that. Now, the great thing about positivity, positive mental health, happiness, employee experience, whatever you want to call it, is that we know that it's very tied to the business agenda and leads to success. And, I can show you data on staff retention, productivity, creativity, and share price. I mean, the retention is fairly obvious, that people who are unhappy leave more often. Maybe the speed of it might surprise you, but this is data where we're looking at how happy people were in quarter one and did they leave in quarter two. So twice as likely to leave next quarter. It's quick. Productivity, we kind of know that success leads to happiness, that, if you do well, you feel happy. These are measured 6 months apart, okay? That does exist. But also existing is the other way around, which is that happiness, team positive experience leads to success. And actually, it's twice as strong. So, the guy that said that culture eats strategy for breakfast was basically reporting on the fact that if you've got a strategy, you need people to be happy to put it into action. And that is very, very true. And in fact, if we think about it, it's kind of a new business model. It's like make teams, gel, then they do good work. And the other thing also works. So we've got a virtuous cycle appearing here. The third one is called is creativity. And I want to just give a little brief way that psychologists look at how they can measure that. Creativity is difficult to measure. But this is what's called the Dunker candle experiment. And they give people a task. They give you a candle, a box of tacks, and some matches. And they say, can you attach the candle to the wall in such a way that when you light it, the wax doesn't drip on the floor? And it's kind of a mind mess. But what you have to see is that there's a box. And you can empty the tacks and attach the box to the wall and then light the candle and it all works. Now, they basically take a control group they do nothing to, they give the experiment to. 13% of them solved it in 5 or 10 minutes, whatever it was, the length of the time. They then looked at the people, they put people into a negative mood, they agitated them into a fear mode or whatever. They found that 20% of them solved it. Now that's kind of interesting in that emotions are energy, they move out. And people who are experiencing a negative emotion, which aren't dysfunctional, they're functional, but they're dealing with, threats to us, they do get more creative, but not nearly as much as those that are in a positive mood. 75% of them solved it in the same length of time. And so if you're trying to be innovative, which goodness, don't we all have to be innovative in this world, not only a COVID world, but already, then actually positivity is massively, massively important for that. You can call it psychological safety if you want to, but it's basically that experience of working together and trusting each other. This even translates into share price. This is data from the US, but it's the S&P 500, sort of like the 500 top companies in the US. This is the actual figure, and then these are the ones that have done well on Glassdoor, great places to work with better cultures. And effectively, they've got about a 3% extra share price growth every year during that period. And that builds up. It's sort of Warren Buffett style returns on it. So every which way you look at it, happiness benefits people. It benefits individuals. Who doesn't want to be happy at work? It benefits organizations. And critically, kind of the engine of it is teams. That teams go both ways. That if you create a good team experience, people are happier. If teams perform well, it helps the organization perform well. And I think that collective small group is a brilliant intervention point for it. Now, happiness is good, positivity is good, but how do we create it? Well, taking the idea of the 5 ways to well-being and how successful they are, we've adapted these for organizations. So instead of targeting the individual, we're particularly targeting the system, the group. But of course, that is echoed at the individual level. And it starts with connect. Relationships are always going to be the key to our positivity. The next one is be fair, which is it's about people feeling treated fairly. That if you're not treated fairly, you feel angry, you don't even get into the system for how happy you are. The next one is empower, which is that, if we shape our own work, we can organize it, we can use our strengths, we feel better. The next one is challenge, which is that if we feel stretched, that's great for us. It's a total misunderstanding to think people want to do nothing and they'll be happy at work. They actually will be bored and unhappy. Most people anyway. And the final one is to feel inspired, which is to feel that your work is meaningful, that you're part of something bigger. And these 5 again become a systemic approach. Connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire. Now, I'm a statistician, so I'm going to put numbers to those. So I create a questionnaire about that, where you've got 3 questions for each of them. And so we have 15 topics that we look at. And of course, we've, as well as been tracking weekly happiness, we've been measuring these other ones. So we can look at the pre and post-COVID, or post-COVID hitting, because we're living with COVID things, and we can see which ones have improved. Creativity, influencing decisions. Perhaps these aren't surprising. These are things that people had to do in order to cope with COVID. But the ones that are falling are relational, team relationships, friendships at work, work-life balance, which is sort of relationships between work and life, and us and our loved ones at home, and how we fit that with work. That's fallen. Although people are working from home more, they probably got less boundaries between those two things, and more, spillover effects from them. So it seems to be under pressure. So we not only need to think about, how we measure it, but we need to think about how we adjust, how we basically build in rituals in organizations that are going to actually help them act on this data, but also help them change their behavior. And I, as well as a statistician, I trained as a therapist when I was young, and I'm very much into the idea that we need to reflect and bring into awareness about what's going on. And I use numbers to do that. But you're really trying to create a learning feedback loop for organizations. And it has 2 forms. The one is the team-based one. That's the weekly measure, meet, act, repeat. So have a team meeting on a Monday morning for 15 minutes and discuss your results. And the whole platform is built towards that. We don't only gather data on how people have felt, we ask them what's gone well for them. Have they got any challenges they want facing? And we bring those into the team meeting and help them do that. By getting into that weekly flow, you start to take care of team culture every week. The next one is to create an organizational feedback loop, which is a more typically like a sort of staff survey, because we do this culture profile once a quarter. And it's more, let's analyze the results. Let's make a plan. Let's act. We help organizations through that by, giving them data straight away so they get it immediately. So there's not a big pause and a big lag there. We push to the top the topics that they can most look at, be most important for them to do. And we help them create action plans about how to do that. And there's lots of dashboards and other things in the tool that do that. Now, those 2 feedback loops are actually highly interconnected. And if I would say that if anything is going to create magic in your organization, it's getting alignment between teams and the organizational goals. So I think of this as these 2 sort of embedded in each other. So the weekly hare is running around and the tortoise is slowly moving. Now, if a team is trying to change and the organization is, and they've got to climb up the inside of that, and that's very hard work. If a team is not wanting to change and the organization is, and it sort of feels like they're discombobulated and they're sort of being thrown around. Get the 2 together, that's it. That's wow. That's like when you're walking along and then you come to a travelator and you just start powering ahead. 2 things are working together, and alignment is really where that happens. So at FridayPulse, we can help you with this. We are a free tool for people to use for 12 weeks, for organizations 50 to 1,000 people. You can come along, you can sign up, and we will support you to get an experience of using it. We started that in March or maybe April, COVID, because we realized no one was spending money, and we're going to reduce it to 6 weeks from January. But if you sign up before Christmas, then you'll get 12 weeks. But basically, you get the whole experience in 6 weeks as well. So, don't unnecessarily rush. But you get an experience of how you use it and whether you want to use it. We're also launching a product called Startup, which is for teams and organizations under 50. It's again, they'll have a 6-week trial. It's going to be like one of these credit card ones. You put it in each month and subscribe to. So both of those you can do. You can look at our platform for how to do that. You can email me if you want to. But then for individuals, we're just launching something we're calling Friday One, which is that people can do a test themselves, and it will show them against those 5 ways of connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire. Help them understand, what they're missing in their job, what they've got in it, and reflect on it. As I said, I'm a therapist. I'm a great believer in bringing into awareness and reflecting on it. So really, that's about the 5 ways to wellbeing and how you can promote mental health at work. There's a lot of thought gone into the platform, a lot of design, and a lot of that comes from the amazing experience I had of being lucky enough to be able to design the original 5 ways to wellbeing and then being so popular across the country. So my contact details are there. You'll find me on LinkedIn very much. And thank you very much indeed.
Nic, thank you very much. And you're going to come back on to the panel discussion later on. Really fascinating stuff. I mean, you have described in many ways the journey that we've all been on, certainly the journey I've been on since this train ticket was used back in February. And also the whole candle nail thing would have depended on my mood on the day as to how well I would have handled that challenge, given that I normally break IKEA furniture when I'm trying to put it together. It also explains that to a certain degree. Thank you so much for your presentation there. A lot of people getting in contact with us wondering, will they be able to see the presentations or get them afterwards? People have different broadband, as we know in this country. So if you missed something, don't worry. This is going to be posted again in full, glorious HD quality. Very bad considering the state of my hair, but it will be available on YouTube at a later point. And we're going to try and make those presentations available to you as well. Keep participating in the polls. A really interesting answer to the first poll that went up at the start there. We'll bring that result to you a little bit later. The second one has just gone live. I like the idea of a workplace happiness measure or KPI. Yes or no is the answer to that. So do take part in that poll if you're watching us on Zoom, and keep the questions coming in. Up next is Dr. Tony Bates. Tony was the head of psychology for 30 years in St. James's Hospital in Dublin. He's the man who founded Jigsaw, which is the National Centre for Youth Mental Health, in 2006. He worked there until his retirement in 2018. He is an honorary professor of psychology in University College Dublin. He is a trained mindfulness teacher. No better man to talk us through what we've all been going through over the last while and the importance of looking after our mental health, because he has played an active role in shaping and writing government policy. Tony, it's over to you.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Justina, for inviting me here to join you today. I'd like to start, if you permit me, by taking you to church, as the song says, specifically to St. Patrick's Cathedral, famous for its one-time dean, Jonathan Swift. In 2016, the board of the Church of Ireland secondary schools decided to make mental health the theme of the coming academic year. To bless this endeavour, they had their secondary school students bussed in from all over the country for a high mass. I was invited to deliver the sermon, a first for this Christian brother's boy. When it came to the appropriate moment in the mass, the verger guided me to the pulpit. I climbed the ornate marble steps to the speaking area, richly lined with red velvet and surprisingly cozy. I looked out on 1,200 fresh-faced teenagers in school uniforms, squeezed into the pews, the aisles, and the open area at the back. In case they weren't intimidating enough, I noted that our Taoiseach Leo and our President Michael D were also gazing up at me expectantly. I looked at them and said, "You are facing a new year. As a psychologist, I can tell you with certainty that two things are going to happen to each of you in the year ahead. You will have good times and you will have bad times." Now, I'm assuming you can all probably handle the good times. I'm here to help you deal with the bad times. Clinical psychology has always been interested in helping people navigate hard times in their lives. It has tried to understand how and why we lose our way, why some of us bounce back from painful experiences, and some of us seem to become prisoners of our past. It has explored lots of ways to help people untie the knots that keep us stuck so that we can be free to make the most of our lives. Recently, psychology has also become interested in what makes people happy, how we can water the seeds of our well-being. The 5 a day that Nic has so elegantly illustrated is a wonderful example of this approach, which we call positive psychology. But here's the thing. I feel my role is to help people deal with the bad times. Perhaps because I've spent most of my career on the dark side of the moon. For 30 years, I worked in the Department of Psychiatry, St. James's Hospital, with people whose hearts had been broken many times over by fear, despair, helplessness, and mental turmoil. And that was just the staff. The so-called patients I worked with struggled with all kinds of mental health difficulties. At some point for each of them, life had become too much, unable to handle whatever was happening or unable to access the support they needed to help them. They had withdrawn into themselves and slipped down a dark hole into fear, confusion, and despair. When things got really bad, they were admitted to hospital. As we worked together, these same people would tell me the story of what had happened in their lives. They were remarkably open. They were honest. As a clinical psychologist, I was paid to have honest conversations. What we discovered was there was always a reason why they felt the way they did and why they behaved the way they did. Weird is a word we put on things we don't understand. And what we don't understand, we fear. And it is this fear that creates stigma. What I learned was that we are, all of us, not so different. We are all vulnerable. We are all a work in progress. There will be times when we feel on top of the world, but there will also be times when life gets confusing, when we stumble in the dark, when we feel in over our heads. Mental health isn't about feeling good or feeling bad. Good mental health is about knowing how you're feeling in any given moment and being able to ask yourself, what would be helpful right now? Until we take time to connect with what is not going well in our personal lives or in our workplace, we can do nothing about it. When we recognize and understand what's happening, we're in a position to act wisely. This is not as easy as it sounds. It takes courage, to be honest, and face what is difficult in our lives, particularly when we're feeling very vulnerable. At first, when you pause and check in with yourself, you may find your mind is spinning. Your feelings are all churned up. There will be too many open files in your brain. Give yourself time. Breathe deeply and slowly, and allow yourself to close down open files and let what's important come into focus. An attitude of friendliness towards yourself is your best bet at times like this. When you relax a little and accept what is happening, you stop fighting with yourself. Your mind is free to make choices. You can continue to do just what you're doing, or maybe you can try something different, something new. Resilience is another word we often hear used alongside mental health and well-being. So what is resilience? Resilience is what we call on when our lives take a turn for the worse. Resilience begins with trusting ourselves to face some difficult reality and achieve a better than expected outcome. Maybe we need to ask for support. That's fine. We all have limits. Knowing them and being humble enough to ask for help isn't weak, it's smart. Resilience is using every resource at our disposal to turn problems that seem unworkable into problems that are workable. Those of you managing departments or responsible for project teams know just what I'm talking about. When a company is in trouble, when office morale is low, when people are snapping at each other for no obvious reason, you take a moment to step back and become curious about what's happening. You tune in to whatever dynamics are at play and you listen. Instead of making rash judgments, you ask questions. And you only act when you have some understanding of what's gone wrong and what might help turn things around. minding our mental health is like that. We're open to our experience, we're curious about it, we don't judge ourselves, we're friendly towards ourselves. We trust our bodies because they don't lie. We listen to what our feelings are trying to say to us. Our distress is always trying to tell us something, to highlight some way that we're out of sync with ourselves or with each other so that we can give that our attention. I'd like to tell you a story about, I think that captures what I've been saying. But first, let me summarize what I've said so far. We all have good times and we all have bad times. Never underestimate the bad times. They're the times when we grow. Mental health is about knowing what you're feeling at any moment in time and asking yourself what might help. Resilience is what we call on when life takes a turn for the worse. We trust ourselves to face what is difficult and work towards a better than expected outcome. We ask for support if we need it. So, my story. This is about a man called Frank. Frank was a very familiar face in the Department of Psychiatry. He'd had many admissions over a period of 20 years, almost annually. He accumulated quite a few labels over that time, each one sounding more ominous than the one before. Paranoid schizophrenia, hallucinogenic psychosis, schizoaffective, which meant that he was a person with some unusual ideas who was easily overwhelmed by emotional distress. During one of his admissions, he approached me in the corridor and asked if he could join my mindfulness class. I knew a little of his history and didn't feel very optimistic that mindfulness could help him much, but he seemed very keen and I felt I couldn't say no. I ran 8-week courses, about 90 minutes a class. It took Frank a while to settle in. When the course was over, he asked if he could repeat the course, and I said, sure. Maybe it wasn't making a big difference in his life, but it didn't appear to be doing him any harm. Midway through the second course, I took him aside and I asked him how things were going generally and whether he was getting anything from mindfulness. He looked at me with a strange look. He said, Tony, I can't believe you're asking me this. He then detailed a number of changes that had happened since joining the course. His medications had been halved. He'd moved into independent but supported accommodation. He was volunteering in a local community centre and had started an open university course. As if I needed more convincing, he told me the following story. He'd recently taken the Dart from city centre to visit a friend in Bray. Sitting in one of the carriages as the train moved from one station to the next, he started worrying about all he had to do in the day ahead. He became absorbed in his thoughts and less aware of people around him. He described a moment where some sound, perhaps the screech of wheels on tracks, startled him. He looked up, and what he saw terrified him. Some of his fellow passengers in the carriage had rays of blue light streaming from their eyes and beamed up at the ceiling. His first instinct was to get away as fast as he could. But in that moment, he recognized what was happening. He remembered what he had learned in our classes. He planted his feet on the floor, he lowered his gaze and focused on his breathing. He allowed the simple rhythm of his breathing to gradually steady him. After a few moments, he spoke to himself in a very kindly and soothing way. You're doing too much. You're overstressed. You keep pushing yourself to do more. Your life has changed so much and so fast. You need to slow down and give your body a chance to catch up. He sat there quietly until he felt calmer, enjoying the steady rhythm of his breathing. In his own time, he opened his eyes and looked up. The carriage was still full of people, but there were no blue lights. As we spoke about this experience, Frank emphasized that this was a small miracle. He said, before I learned to recognize and take care of my stress, that story would have had a very different ending, he said. I would have reacted to seeing lights by standing up and changing carriages at the next station. In the new carriage, everyone's eyes would have had blue light beaming out of them. I would have jumped out of the train at the next stop and ran all the way home because I couldn't and wouldn't trust any form of public transport. I'd have locked myself in my room, climbed under the covers, and my fears would have taken hold of me. After a few days, the community nurse would have been called, and I'd have been admitted to hospital, where I would stay for up to 9 months. Good mental health means believing in ourselves. Some of you may be in a good place in your life at the moment, so believing in yourself is not a big ask. Some of you may be low on self-confidence and feeling vulnerable, but I'm saying that whatever you're feeling is okay. What's important is that you accept what's happening just now and speak to yourself in a kind way. That you listen to what you need and you do something that helps, no matter how small a step that might be. These same skills being noticing what's happening in your life at any given moment, being curious about it, being kind, asking for what might help, have relevance for the well-being of your organization. It's wise to create an ethos in your organization where there is space to pause and reflect on what's happening. Recognizing the early signs of something wrong allows you to deal with it before it grows legs. Creating a culture that isn't blaming of people enables people to feel they can make mistakes and still be open and tell you what's happening or what's not happening. As a manager or project leader, being willing to hear where staff morale is at with your team, listening to unspoken conflicts, asking colleagues what would help, acting on what you learn, investing in making people feel they belong, builds good mental health and the resilience of your team. To close, mental health at a personal or organizational level means being in touch, being awake, and being kind. Knowing what is happening and asking, what might be a helpful next step? Thank you.
Tony, thank you very much indeed. Fascinating insight. I could listen to your voice all day long. Lovely and soothing and relaxing. I'm kind of calmer having listened to your presentation, not to mention what you actually said. So you're going to stay with us and we're going to go back to you for our panel in just a moment. Our third poll is currently up and running if you're watching us on Zoom Live. The question there is, do you feel that your workplace prioritizes your mental health and well-being? A very valid and relevant question because, again, workplaces have been dealing with this in different ways. Some have been very proactive, some have been slower to it, and we're going to tease all of those topics out with our panel this morning. So let's welcome our first two speakers who are with us here in the studio. Paula Cogan is the president of Cork Chamber. She is also the CEO of Cognate Health, and Priscilla Lynch, who is the head of Service Health and Wellbeing for Cork, Kerry, HSE. You're both very welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we bring Nic and Tony back in, I just want to talk to you about the last few months, because Paula, it has been an unbelievable roller coaster for everybody. I mean, there has never been anything in our lifetimes or anything in the last while that has collectively brought us to a state of panic and fear collectively. I mean, It's been crazy, hasn't it?
It's been nuts. I mean, we have a population of 2 million, working population, 800,000 are currently working from home. Who knew at mid-February that would be the situation that we would be in now? Mind yourself has taken on a totally different meaning, I think, for all of us in general. So yeah, it's just unprecedented.
Yeah, and Priscilla, everybody's in this. Like, I mean, you obviously work in this space, but we all had to deal with this in our own way, at our own pace, and to try to make sense of it individually. Not to mention when we get to employers and how workplaces should have dealt with this.
Absolutely, Jonathan. I think like what you described, a roller coaster, certainly a roller coaster, but it does come down to an individual perspective. So, you know, from listening to Nic earlier on around 5 ways to wellbeing and having that resilience ourselves, each and every one of us had to tap into that over the last couple of months and still do on an ongoing basis. I think we're all waiting in anticipation in terms of what the outcome of next week will be, and there's quite a lot of talk and anxiety about what will come on foot of that.
Paula, if I can come to you next as well to talk about how the employers, because employers are human at the end of the day. And let's not forget that the people who were looked to for leadership and were looked to be the calming influence were also going through this at the same time. Hugely. And that posed a rather unique challenge, didn't it?
Very much so. I mean, the practicality, Jonathan, of moving, you know, an entire team to work from home, from a home working perspective, thinking of stuff like laptops, thinking of stuff like communication, Wi-Fi, etc. You know, that took up the first 3 to 4 weeks. And it was just very much just making sure that businesses could continue in some shape, form or fashion. As we've gone through the process and working with employees, it's become incredibly, you know, people have become very aware that mental well-being is now a huge issue. I suppose initially there was a certain level of, oh, this is going to be great. I can work from home and be in my pajamas for 6 to 8 weeks. We're now in 8 or 9 months of it, and it's a very different situation.
Let's not fool ourselves. There's people in their pajamas watching this right now, and they're very welcome. Whatever shape or form you're in this morning,
yes,
you're more than welcome.
We won't take any bias there. You were mentioning earlier that you had your suit from February. I don't think I've had to wear a pair of high heels in about 8 months, Jonathan.
Look, but again, this is something that we will take from this year when we eventually put it behind us and remember the year we didn't have to dress formally for quite some time. And Priscilla, in that scenario, and we'll get into this in a minute when we bring the two lads back in, this was a very steep learning curve for everybody. And there has to be a certain amount of forgiveness and understanding for that, doesn't there?
Absolutely. Tony just spoke about kindness, and I think for me, certainly as somebody working in healthcare, kindness was just brought to the fore from the very beginning. And I think that's really important, that we look after each other. And certainly we look after the wider society. So I suppose my role, Jonathan, is implementing Healthy Ireland within Cork and Kerry, and that's very much about providing an environment for people to live well, to their optimum both physical and mental well-being, to improve their overall. And the pandemic has really brought that to a fore, because everybody, you know, in terms of they want to be well. They want to keep well because they've been cocooned or isolated or out of work or working from home, managing schooling of their children, etc. So certainly as part of my brief, that's aided it. The pandemic has aided it in terms of people want to get out, get physical, eat well, look after themselves and look after each other, which is really important. I mean,
there's always a paradox. And for me, the paradox in this is that there has never been a time when people have focused more on how they're feeling. And are you okay? The question that daren't speak its name 12 months ago, you all right? That question became normalized during this year. I mean, that's a positive. It has to be a positive, that the discussion around how people are feeling is to the fore and no longer to the background.
Absolutely. And I think that it's the listening element of that. So I think prior to it, we would ask, how are you feeling? But to actually listen to what somebody is telling us is really, really important. So you're right. And I think we need to harness that and we need to keep that.
Okay, so we have the results of our polls. I'm going to get to them in a little bit. So thank you, everyone who's taken part in that. I want to bring our two guests in studio to meet them with our two guests virtually. So Nic and Tony, say hello to Paula and Priscilla.
Hello, Paula. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning, Nic. Good morning,
you
Tony.
You can wave. It's okay. We can see you. It's okay to wave. It's legitimate. We can say that. That's fine. Very good. The ladies are reluctant to wave. You can wave back as well. There we go. It's all good. It's all good. Our theme for this first section is it's never too late to start, because lots of people watching this right now might be thinking, well, how can we do it? How can we start during a pandemic? Nic, I'm going to begin with you. Like, that first step would have been one that was difficult to take in January. Is it easier to take it now?
The first step to what? Sorry, the first step of asking how they are?
Yeah, the first step in trying to tackle this issue in a workplace that perhaps hasn't dealt with it before.
So I think that I'm getting a lot of echo, sorry.
Yeah, we're going to sort that. Yeah, we can hear you, so we're just going to sort that out, but keep going.
Okay. So the first the first step of asking people, are you all right, I think is easier for people, but it's acting on it when everyone is so, we're all distressed ourselves. I think that burnout is starting to come, fatigue, we're tired after this period. And one of the things, both our data saying and we're hearing from our clients is work-life balance. And it's strange because people have got rid of the commutes, which lots of people hated. But actually the commute was a way of changing personas. In a sense, we have a different work persona than we do at home, or it's a challenge to do that. And I think that breaking down is quite difficult. So one of the guys I speak to, he's got a 6-year-old daughter and he's a successful business guy. And he would walk from his office into the kitchen and his daughter would be very confused because she wasn't seeing daddy. She was seeing this sort of Uber businessman. And she said, where's daddy gone? She said, it's fun, daddy. And he was really distressed about that. And it's very difficult to move between these different parts of ourselves. And I think that we will probably want to have some introduction to that again. But it's just a very hard time. And some of it is cumulative. And some of it is sort of slowly catching up on us. And I think that's why... there is a lot of good. It is going to be, world's never going to go back to how it was before. I think it will be an opportunity to rethink about what mental health is and positive mental health. Yep. And it's very challenging.
Yeah, everything is happening at warp speed. And that's the challenge. When you try to do things quickly, it can go wrong. Tony, if I can ask you, do you think that was something of an advantage in this scenario? That if we were trying to accelerate that question of, are you okay? It would have taken an awful lot longer had we not had the shadow of a pandemic hanging over it.
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question. Apologies.
My questions are really terrible today by the sounds of it. I'm presuming... No, what I'm saying is the acceleration within the workplace of asking people, are you okay? Has the pandemic made that easier?
Yeah, I think there has been an extraordinary outpouring of kindness and concern, and that's really good. I think that what I'm saying is that I think it begins with yourself. I'm really saying very simply, look after yourself. Be aware about how vulnerable or how strong you're feeling. Be honest about that, and just take care. It may be, as I was using that image of too many files open on your screen, and you need to literally allow someone to close down, and that could be a walk around the block, or it could be something like that. But I think the other thing then is when you've taken care of yourself, I think to turn towards each other and to really be present and be honest with the other person. I mean, be present in a very real way and check how they're doing, but don't, just ask. And then I think the final thing is to let people know you care, So self-help, tuning into somebody or people around you, and then let them know you care. That may be the most important message that they get. It's not that you have a solution, but it's that there is something in you knowing that it's a tough time for them that changes the whole experience for them and makes it bearable.
Paula, if I can ask from an occupational health point of view, if we were to do this 12 months ago, you'd have an away day, or you'd bring everyone and put them into a canoe,
yes.
or do something that most people will go, oh, for God's sake, we'll do it, go on, we'll get to it. Now everyone is in their own homes. They don't get to leave unless they go for a walk. For a large part, if you had kids, as Nic had pointed out, they were running around you, and you were trying to do homework as well as have a conference call with England. How could you manage that? And was that a particular challenge that we had to address quite quickly?
Yeah, it certainly is, Jonathan. Leia Healthcare completed a survey just in September with 1,000 employees of companies, and 91% said they have a level of anxiety that they've never experienced before. 60% have not taken holidays, and up to 80% have not taken any sick leave. That's unprecedented as well. And we have to be mindful of that. And employers need to be very careful when they're checking in with employees and saying, how are you, that they're actually listening to how they're
not just asking the question because they feel they have to.
No, because, I mean, again, you would meet your employees ad hoc in the canteen, or you'd meet them in the car park, and those conversations could be had. It's very difficult if you're on a Zoom call with 20 of your team and asking that specific question individually. So I think employers have certainly moved to having individual conversations with employees, checking in with them. It could be at the start of a call, it could be at the end of a call. We've all heard of the cocktail master classes and the sourdough and baking competitions, etc. And I think we got to a stage where, we all had experienced that in the first 6 to 8 weeks, and we've potentially moved on from there. But again, those activities can just let everybody have a little bit of downtime together. I've heard of groups who are doing walking, virtual walking, saying, okay, so from 11 to 11:30, everybody downs tools and goes outside for a period of time. So it's those practical elements that can allow people to feel that they are part of a collective, but that somebody is actually caring about them as well.
Priscilla, is there a risk that we've lost a little bit of nuance? Because if you know your colleagues very, very well, and if you're with them, if you're standing in the kitchen making a cup of tea, you'll pick up on something. You will, an employer or a colleague will go, Priscilla's not right today. And that might prompt the question, do we lose that when we're not together collectively? And is that the biggest challenge in the last few months?
I think where relationships would be strong already, you probably won't lose that, because you'll still pick it up, like Paula said, when you're speaking with your employees and you're really actively listening to what they're telling you, then you will have that insight to say, okay, Jonathan's not actually responding and there's something there, and I'll delve a little bit deeper. But I also think that we're more conscious now as well that we need to actively listen as employers, and I think that's really important. But equally, certainly as an employer, an employee, we're more open about discussing, actually today is not a good day, I'm struggling here, there's an awful lot going on in terms of maybe what's happening at home or in terms of the pressures that are coming in from work, and openly expressing that to your employer. And I think that's a big change, certainly what we're seeing.
Yeah, there's lots of questions coming in, which is really, really good. I want to put one. I want to put one to the two guys who are with us by Zoom. I hope managers are in on this. Investment in mental health needs to be from the top down. How do we make decision makers interested in mental health? Nic, I'm going to put that to you first of all, because I mean, anyone who watched your presentation would realise the value of engaging in this type of exercise, but there possibly would have been a reluctance to do it historically, which we might be paying a bit of a price for now. Yeah,
I think that a lot of these things we've given a little bit of lip service to, and I think there's huge variability across organisations. So I'm a systems guy. I basically think about how can you do this consistently across organisations and across society, and how do you put in things that help support that? And to give them credit, or give them some slack, a lot of line managers are sort of accidental people managers. They've been promoted for technical skills or length of service rather than necessarily their people skills, and they're often frightened of these conversations for their own reasons. And so, yes, you can pick it up in the car park, in the canteen, but an awful lot of people do see a signal and just don't listen to it, hope it's going to go away. And I think that what we need to do is, yes, normalise it, and this is going to help a lot, but we also need to be systemic about it. And that's, when Tony talks about, that mental health is knowing how you feel, organisations, to be sort of mentally healthy organisations, need to know how everyone is feeling in the organisation, so that those sort of personal care things that Tony talked about, and also the two panelists in the studio did, they're brilliant, but it's how do we do them consistently across our organisations? How do we ensure they're done? Because absolutely for certain, there'll be hot and cold spots. There'll be some teams that have got great team leaders who have been amazing during the pandemic, and there will be some people who've been totally ignored. And how do you see that? And that's in a way what I try to do with our tools, is give visibility to that, to basically support all of that good behavior we know is good in doing that.
Okay.
And yeah.
Tony, if I can put that point to you, communication is obviously hugely important in this, that you have to have good communication embedded within the organization. But as we know, individuals are better communicators than others. What advice would you give to somebody who traditionally, maybe they have issues saying, well, I don't feel comfortable talking about this, or it's not my place, or I don't know X well enough to have that conversation. How do you get them past that?
Well, I think that language is very important. We're only using mental health in recent years. And, for most of us, mental health meant mental ill health. And it was not seen to be, to have any real part to play in many organizations. If people are unwell and they need professional help, that's fine. Just let them go take care of that. So I think words like morale and words like, resilience within the team, I think these are better words. And I think most managers are exhausted by dealing with atmospheres and unspoken tensions that are there within their office. And I think it's so wearing. So the real question for me is, as Nic says, it's not just, there's the momentary question, look, what could we do to kind of sustain morale? And that's probably a structural question within the organization. I worked with some frontline ICU and basically got the teams to have that kind of checking in with each other before the day and at the end of the day, on the basis that not everybody had to speak, on the basis that it was a very light-handed, light-touch check-in, but that there could be an opportunity to hear even though somebody was having a hard time. And that solidarity enables them to step into their work in a different way. So I think it's probably, I think selling mental health to managers is on the basis of performance and morale and teamwork rather than anything else.
Paula, there's a very good point raised there. Occupational health traditionally would be so you don't fall over and break your leg. And mental health, as Nic said, was, and Tony said, mental ill health. Are we over that? I mean, have we now accepted that mental health is very important?
I believe we are, and I think again, quality of life discussions, etc. As post-COVID, I'm very hopeful that mental health will become, a serious concern for employers and employees alike. 70% of employees are now showing with some level of stress or anxiety. And employers are realizing that, early intervention is incredibly important. So if somebody initially is saying to you, I'm not having a great day, but a week later, that's still the case, then we certainly need to start addressing it. And early intervention can be just picking up a phone and having a conversation with an occupational health nurse, just at that level, and having that initial conversation. That can be done virtually. Who would have thought 70% of initial assessments from an occupational health perspective would now be done virtually? I mean, that would not have been the case back in January and February.
It's almost easier because, you don't have to physically go and sit in someone's office. You're just making a Zoom call like the guys are on a Zoom call now, which is very much part of who we are in 2020.
And there's a comfortable feeling about it versus, you're going into the official office of the official doctor or nurse.
And that brings me to my next question, which has come in. And keep the questions coming into us, folks, using the Q&A at the bottom if you're on Zoom. And Priscilla, I'll put this one to you. Self-stigma continues to be an issue. What can we do at an organisational level to break the fear of it, discussing mental health so the employee can seek help? And that's the big one. Because, I remember years ago seeing a version of occupational health, which was a phone line that you could ring if you really wanted. But, don't break your neck. We now have to get over that, because if you're feeling bad, the last thing you want to do is let that person continue to feel bad, because it affects them, it'll affect their output and create further problems down the line. If you have an issue, you need to talk about it. And that has to come from the organisation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think like Paula has outlined, there is an openness to that now in terms of a two-way dialogue process around it, and initiatives such as Psyched definitely promote that, promote a healthy environment for people to work in. But I suppose there's also, the workplace is one element of it, and obviously Psyched is an initiative for a workplace, but obviously your mental health is impacted by the whole of society, your community, your family. So it's when, like Tony said, in terms of the work he was doing with ICU, check in with people in the morning or before they go home. Some will engage, some won't. But it's actually about having conversations with people as well, what will support them, not just within the work environment, but also outside of work, the broader society piece. So I think we will always be working at reducing that stigma, but definitely I believe that we have made significant leaps in that.
Okay, let's move on to our second theme. Many workplaces tuning in today have made great starts and great practices are now in place. But a common question that keeps coming back to the team in Psyched is, how do you sustain mental health promotion initiatives? I mean, it is a marathon, not a race, Tony, if I could put it that way. People have now introduced new practices. It'll be new to some, it won't be to others, but keeping going is very important. How do we build that resilience into the workplace of the future?
Well, I mean, you don't have to. I'd say you can keep going and just beat them into productivity if you want, and many people do that, and many organizations do that. But I think if you want to succeed, you've got to be smarter. And I think that has to come, and it has to come from the leadership. There has to be, and that's what I think predicts, whether it's leadership in a secondary school, it's the principal who will determine whether, some kind of mental health initiative is sustained or not. And I work a lot in schools, and this is so powerfully true. So I think, first of all, it's the people who are leading, and they have to kind of understand leadership as creating and instilling a sense of belonging and solidarity among the workers. If they're smart, they do that. But lots of organizations don't do that. So I think it is a choice, and I think it's a very serious choice. And I suppose one of the ways that I think the work of Nic is one of the helpful things is that he brings data to the conversation, and the data can show very clearly the differences it makes. I had one experience. I'll just tell you very briefly. There was an airline. It was quite well known. And it had a reputation for being very hostile to its customers and mean and charged for everything. It was Irish-owned, actually. In 2011, they had their first profit warning, and it came in the third quarter. And then so they asked me to come and talk about, trying to make the organization a bit healthier. And I knew nothing about organizational psychology, really, and I worked in the clinics, but I knew a little bit about attachment theory, which is how important it is for us to bond with each other. And I knew what makes that happen, So I went into them and said, now look, I don't know about things, but here's something, to form relationships, and I think brand loyalty is the kind of relationship. You need consistency, reliability, and warmth. Okay, they're the three things that Bowlby showed us. Now, I said, you guys are good on consistency. You get there on time. You're reliable. You're cheap, but you don't have warmth. And I said, if you don't have this thing is going to collapse, and it won't work. And as soon as somebody else comes along and is offering the same price, people shift. Well, I had such a hostile reaction. It was unbelievable. I won't even describe. It was like trying to sell non-violence to the NRA, the Right Association. And I particularly one individual there, you probably wouldn't know him though. But anyway, he was completely unimpressed. But they had a second profit warning following spring. And the board pulled him in and said, listen, we've got to do this bait warm thing, And so they did. And they took measures, pre-warm, post-warm. And I spoke in 2013 with one senior management team, and they had the data, and it was extraordinary, the difference. And all they did, they said to me, how can we train our employees to be warmer? And I said, you don't have to. They know how to do it. They're inherently kind people, but you need to give them permission and freedom to do that. And that's what they did. And I mean, it was, you probably know what happened. It was the profits just soared. And as the CEO said at the time, if I'd known it was going to be this easy, I would have done it years ago. Well, that was the first reaction, I can tell you. So, I feel that there has to be we've got to sell it. We can't just assume that people would do it because it's the morally right thing to do.
I suppose, Nic, if I can put that point to you, a very valid point that Tony has brought forward there. management, particularly high-level management, they thrive on data. We are overwhelmed with data right now. If they see data on this, is that a good way to connect with the higher-ups so that it can filter down? And you've managed to generate that. I mean, you pretty much put a graph up there that described my 2020 incredibly accurately. I mean, is data the key to success, do you think?
Look, it's a strategy, and I'm a statistician, so it's my trick, you know, and that's what I can bring to the table. You know, I didn't take the path of being a therapist, though. God, I'm jealous of Tony's voice and his the warmth that he expresses with it. But I think data can do that, and data, you know, numbers are the language of business, and in fact, they're the language of governments as well, to a large degree. Maybe less so, actually. Probably businesses are more evidence-based than governments. And actually, that's hopeful for us here. And I show, you know, yes, the happiness KPI to people, but, you know, I also show all those metrics about, you know, that we know that, you know, if you increase half a point on a 5-point scale, it's 17% lower, higher staff retention. It's 7 to 20% higher productivity, depending on how creative you are. You know, and if you show those hard numbers, some people, that's the business case. But it is actually mainly appealing to their warmth. The senior leader, strangely, I mean, they sort of take the business case, but strangely, they've got to connect with it personally to put this in. They've got to have had, and of course, what's happening is a lot of senior leaders are hitting a wall themselves because they just white knuckled through 2020, and I think they will start to see that they are feeling vulnerable, that they are feeling, and if you can connect to them on that warmth, that human level, then they will implement something like this. And actually, it's really about how you delegate it to the team leaders, how you get the team leaders to express that too, and how you get colleagues to express it to each other. But during COVID, at the very bottom of that curve where we were all feeling the most vulnerable, having the most time, what we found in our systems was that thank yous to other people doubled or tripled in organizations. That people were feeling down and they were thanking others for the support they received. So the positivity was not in their own experience, but in their feeling of relationship with others. Yeah, and so that naturalness can really, really work.
I found that as well, Paul, in a lot of the companies that I dealt with throughout the year, that it was incredible, the creativity that came out this year. I mean, it was mind-blowing. The ideas, the collective nature of it. I mean, a lot of it was due to the fact that some people said, right, let's just plow on, because if we don't, we might lose a job and B, might go crazy. But all that came out from all of that was ideas and companies going in different directions and an acceleration. I mean, it really proves Nic's point that a happy environment will bring out the best in people, even when it's hard to create that happiness.
Hugely. I mean, you know, from a Cork Chamber perspective, we have over 1,200 companies with 100,000 employees. The innovation that has happened in that space alone has been absolutely phenomenal. But again, one of the key considerations for our members is talent attraction. You know, you want to be known as the employer of choice in your industry. And, you know, by being an employer that's kind to its employees, but also to the environment, you know, from a sustainability perspective, includes all communities, LGBT, diversity and inclusion is all considered as part of the business, then they are the companies that will succeed in a situation like this. And, you know, you will see that already. And people, no matter what age, still want to work for a company that is inherently good. And I think COVID has proven that fact. People, we are people at the end of the day. It's part of the Irish psyche, you know, to be nice. We probably had forgotten all about that in the last number of years, but it's come to the fore again. And hopefully, and I'm convinced it will be one of the great things post-COVID, you know, that companies will realise that looking after the employees, looking after the environment, making sure that we're good employers and good citizens is going to be crucial.
Yeah, and I think that change has to be semi-permanent, if not permanent. Priscilla, there's a very common theme coming through in the questions, and that's about managers. Like, how do we manage the managers? Because the risk is that managers take on the problems of the team and end up with a mental health issue themselves if they're not sufficiently trained. So in making sure that this embeds properly and that this does continue, or even if the conversation needs to start, you have to make sure that the managers are bought in, don't you? Because if they're not bought in, it fails.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, Tony made the point that managers themselves, from caring for their teams for the most of this year, are under significant pressure themselves individually. So I do think they need a network amongst their own board within their respective work environments. They need to look after themselves. self-care is important, that resilience that we spoke about earlier on, being kind to themselves, because if you're not kind to yourself, you're not going to be able to be kind to others. So I think that's really important. I take the point as well that Tony said in terms of a lot of people fall into management. It may be due to number of years that they're in a particular setting, etc. So I do think that there needs to be support for managers. They need to be made aware of how they themselves and what supports are there for staff.
Is it okay for a manager to come across as a bit vulnerable from time to time?
Absolutely. I see no question about it. I'm sure if you spoke to my team, we had a very unfortunate and a very sad passing of a colleague last week, and I myself was particularly vulnerable, and I expressed that to my team, and the support that I got from my team certainly aided my own resilience. We're all individuals at the end of the day, regardless of what our roles within a work environment is, or within our family network, or within our community. I absolutely see no shame whatsoever in showing our individual vulnerability.
Tony, there could be the old school response still of, oh, Jonathan's not right. He needs to go and see the doctor. Look, we'll sign him off on sick leave and see what happens in a few weeks. That doesn't tackle the issue why Jonathan mightn't be feeling right in the workplace, does it? Do we need to get rid of that once and for all? Do we need to kind of stop the automatic assumption amongst some that medicalisation, doctors, an outside source can solve the problem, when 9 times out of 10 it's probably an inside issue?
9 times out of 10 they can't. 9 times out of 10, and this is a very good research on ICU nursing in the UK, really good research that showed that it was peer-to-peer support, normal peer support, normal team solidarity that allowed people, enabled people to cope with the struggles of their work and what they had to witness. And that, for the most part, they do not need psychology and PTSD counselling, for the most part. For the most part, they process this experience together in an informal way. And so that's why I think the key is to build that solidarity, because a lot of those mental health issues can be resolved. Everybody has something happening probably every week in their lives, whether it's with work or family. We all have some crisis breaking on the horizon, and we need that support. But that does not mean we need intensive community mental health intervention. So I think we need to break that. It's to kind of normalise, I think, the suffering that people have to deal with. And to recognise that we're social beings that need to be able to look to each other for that support. It's just been it's fundamental. It's not rocket science.
I mean, one of the things, Nic, that employers are going to look at in the data is, well, how have the last few months gone? Because they'll probably want to make decisions about returning to work. How functional might it be for people to take 3 days at home and 2 days in the office and so on? And there's a good question here I want to put to you from one of the people watching. How do we continue to support people to work from home post-COVID? Policies that exist are outdated, and we need to support different ways of working. So can the data help with that? Is it too soon, or is it just a natural evolution that has been sped up?
So I think that from the data I've seen is that people now want to mix, that they would like to work from home more than they did pre-COVID, but not exclusively. And I think that there are things that are starting to become apparent that are missing. And they are about those relationships, about friendships, about the sort of glue that holds us together. So you could see some sort of scenario where people come into the office 1 or 2 days a week if they're desk-based work. Of course, there's different types of work. I'm talking about desk-based work here. And so then there is also the fact, we were talking about talent attraction earlier, that I think that things are going to get quite messed up with talent attraction, with geographies. And if people can work at home, then why work in Ireland? Why not outsource to the Philippines? Why not people go and live abroad? Why not whatever? So I think we're going to have quite a different job market in 2022, not in 2021. But I think when this settles down, it will make it organizations have to compete more to keep talent. And I think that having positive experiences will be part of it. I know in my team, I'm going to try and gather the team once a month going forward, rather than once a week, because I've got somebody live in Manchester somewhere. But try and invest in that, pay for their train tickets, pay for their hotels to come down when we're allowed to do that again, and have 2 days together where we do part brainstorming and part a bit of fun, and just remember who we are, because I haven't seen some people since February.
I know, that and the creative process is suffering as a result of that. We do know that. I've 2 more questions for the guys in the studio with me before we go to the results of the poll. Emotional intelligence, asked one viewer, Paula, is it important to promoting mental health in organisations? I mean, my untrained approach to that would be emotional intelligence is something that you either have, you don't, and if you don't have it, you're in trouble. What's your response?
No, I think, you can, of course, there are some people who naturally have a much higher level of emotional intelligence. There are others who don't, but they can actually be brought along on the journey as well.
Even reluctantly?
Potentially sometimes, yes. But again, emotional intelligence means different things to different people. So again, I think as long as you're in your comfort zone when speaking of it and with your employees, then absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with saying, look, I am very aware I'm not incredibly emotionally intelligent at the moment, but I'm willing to take the journey, definitely.
Priscilla, another one here. How do you manage conflict without taking sides? I mean, that's the old classic question, isn't it? If conflict does arise, or if there's an issue, so you see someone else is struggling, your manager's not dealing with it, how do you help there?
I think as Nic and Tony mentioned earlier on, the peer support is a huge component there. So if you know somebody is suffering, there's no reason why you can't engage with that individual and offer support. And if they really do need direct support from their line manager on foot of that, what's stopping you in seeking some support for them? But I do believe that it's the peer support, the family connections, showcasing to people how they can look after themselves is really, really important. And we can all play a role in that.
And Tony, I'm going to put one to you if I can. This has just come in. Issues were there pre-COVID-19, especially for men. And they referenced the construction sector in this question as well. Any advice on supporting men in dealing with this? Because let's face it, when it comes to emotional intelligence, we are understandably slightly behind the curve as a gender.
Well, I just want to say a word about emotional intelligence, if I might. But the men thing, I think our conversations are probably shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face. I've certainly developed quite a relationship with a couple of men who've been working with me in the garden over the last 6 months, and it's really, and they all have issues. I don't need to know them even, but we've really kept each other going in an indirect way. So I think men need to find a different way in to support, and we need to really respect what support, the experience of support for a man can be different. On emotional intelligence, I had Daniel Coleman here in my kitchen last night, we toasted the 25-year anniversary of the book Emotional Intelligence, via Zoom, I should add. But emotional intelligence, that was the reason I chose that story about Frank, because emotional intelligence is 4 things: self-awareness, it's self-management, it's empathy, and it's social skills. They're the key things. So in Frank's case, his self-awareness was that he was deeply stressed. His self-management was that he went into himself, he breathed slowly, he spoke to himself kindly. His empathy was that he realized I didn't know how he was doing. And he told me the story to make it very clear. And his social skills that he learned subsequently, and this is a man who 5 years later was off all medication and completely normal after a 20-year history of radical psychiatry. This was our worst client, if you like. But the social skill, he learned how to manage his paranoia, and he would say to people, when you said there about being a bit disappointed, were you talking about me? And he checked out things. And that he did it in a light way, so that I get paranoid sometimes. Can I just ask you? And that was enough. He did not go into, fantasy land. So I think emotional intelligence is learned primarily. I think it's something we nurture in people, but it is those skills. And we're learning it now from the worst psychiatric case in James's, and the staff will reinforce that. But it's that self-awareness, self-management, empathy, and social skills.
I thought when they said shoulder to shoulder at the start, I thought you were going to break into Ireland's call, but it went off in a very different direction, Tony. Look, we appreciate that. I want to go to the results of the poll because you've been very good in participating, getting your questions in and responding to the questions that have come in. So the first question we asked you was about whether your workplace, those who are watching right now, have an active mental health promotion policy. I said this result was interesting. It is. 55% said yes, you do. So here we are, 9 months into COVID, and just over half have a mental health promotion policy. The second question was a more benign. I like the idea of a workplace happiness measure or a KPI. 93% said, yeah, that's a really good idea. Let's go with that one, which shows you there's a disconnect between the policies that are in place and the desire of the people who are working in those workplaces. And the last one, 49% feel their workplace does not prioritize their mental health and well-being. That's no, it was the other way around. It was 41% said that they prioritize their work health and well-being, whereas 59% said they didn't. So we have a disconnect, Priscilla, don't we? I mean, those are very interesting findings, because what they're telling us is they're telling us that we want it, but it's not there. And we feel as if we're not getting the supports we need.
Absolutely. So I think it's certainly listening to the people that are tuned in this morning that there's still an awful lot of work to be done in all of the workplaces in terms of providing those supports for individuals. So I think it's really good that we get an opportunity today in terms of highlighting the Psyched initiative that's there and other wellbeing initiatives that are for individuals within the workplace.
Okay, the clock is viciously against us because I've been yakking way too much, right? The panel has been fascinating. It's great to speak to you all. In 30 seconds, each of you, if I can ask you, what's the most important thing you want people to take away from today? Nic, I'm going to begin with you.
So I think it's that whole reflection part that actually if we want to improve our workplaces, we need to create reflection both individually and as organisations. That's the sort of emotionally intelligent organisation. So I'm going to say very selfishly that if 93% of you want a happiness KPI, you can come to us. You can reflect on your own positivity at work by going to friday1.com. And you can do that yourself by taking a small survey, and it reflects back to you and gives you lots of tips. Because some of it's a personal journey, but I'm very interested in the personal and the systemic, how we do that. But I think it's a great opportunity, COVID, although it's been bloody hard.
And so say all of us. Tony, in 30 seconds, what's the most important takeaway you want to give people?
I would say mind yourselves. Take time to tune in, to connect, and let things settle and see what maybe needs attention. Number two, I would say tune into each other. Be present, be real, be authentic. Don't expect an immediate reply. Allow people to ramble a bit before they get to the point. But they will talk if they know you're listening. And number three, let them know you care. And in your organization, let your staff know you care about it.
Fascinating. By the way, there's been loads of comments talking about your delivery, Tony. Everybody loves the way you speak, and I think that's a universal. I can see why you ended up in the gig that you were in. Let's put it that way. If I can go to you, Paula, what's the most important takeaway you want employers to bring from this today, and employees, because there's lots of them watching too?
Look at from an employer's perspective, look at your current employees. You are going to have had some superstars appear in the last 8 months. Bring them together. Let them come up with the policy. It doesn't have to sit with you. You need to bring it from within.
Okay, and Priscilla, final word to you on behalf of Psyched. What do you want people to do today? What's the most important thing they need to take away from what we've been talking?
I think for employers to listen to what your employees are saying in terms of the need that's there. Individuals want support. There's supports there. Utilise those supports. I would say to individuals, be kind to yourself and be kind to others.
Okay, and look, that's really, really solid advice. It's been fascinating speaking to the four of you. So we now have the awkward wavy thing where we have to wave at each other because two are virtual and two are in studio. So everybody wave goodbye.
Bye.
Very politely. There we go. Paula, Priscilla, Nic and Tony, thank you so much for joining us today. It really has been interesting because I'm coming at this from the same way that lots of you guys are coming at this, which is I didn't know where to start. It was a very, very difficult year for everybody. But there was a sense of collegiality. We were all in this together. I've been consistent since March in saying that anyone who tells you with any degree of confidence what 2 weeks' time looks like, well, they're just not telling you the truth. We have to keep standing, as Tony said, shoulder to shoulder as we work through this together. and get out the far side. I mean, I'm an optimist at heart, and I genuinely, in my heart, believe that next year is going to be a much better year. And God willing, we'll actually be in a room together this time next year talking about the successful programs that have been implemented and the learnings that we have had over the last 12 months. So thank you to Psyched. Thank you to our speakers. It's been really, really great to be part of this. That concludes my involvement. Daniel, I'm going to hand over to you to wrap it all up.
So thank you very much for that and all of your good work in hosting us this morning, Jonathan. Also, a particular thanks to all our speakers, particularly to Nic and to Tony for their excellent presentations, and to Paula and Priscilla for the panel discussions. And also a huge thank you to everybody for tuning in, for asking the questions and engaging. I think this has been a fantastic event. Also just to thank VE Studios here this morning for supporting us with all of the technology, which is fantastic. And finally, a huge thank you to the Psyched steering group. They have done a huge amount of work in the background. These gigs don't happen easily. So thank you to Justina and to Aoife and to Denise and Colleen for organising the speakers, and in particular to Aoife has done a Trojan amount of work answering all your emails and dealing with Eventbrite. So huge thanks to everybody, and also thank you to Healthy Ireland for funding and supporting some of the work that Psyched does. Just if you want to get involved in Psyched, and we're hoping that this is an opportunity for you to start thinking about being a Psyched ambassador, to start championing the mental health agenda in your own workplace. There's lots of information on our website. We have a policy document about how you can get started with Psyched and promoting the mental health agenda. And we have a nice checklist that you can do a self-assessment and an audit of your mental health promotion practices in your work environment. And all our details are here on this slide. So Aoife, who I mentioned earlier on, is our coordinator, and she would be delighted to link with you all if you want to become Psyched partners and ambassadors. So thank you everybody for your interest in this topic and joining the Psyched initiative. Thank you.